The original Sony PlayStation was one hell of a console with an awesome library of games. The PlayStation was one of the first consoles to really push polygonal 3D games as the industry standard. Classic juggernauts like Gran Turismo, Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, and Metal Gear Solid aided Sony in selling over 100 million PlayStation units. But many more games were produced for the system across the span of a decade. One of those titles I vaguely remember playing as a kid is a platformer called Ape Escape, developed and published by Sony Computer Entertainment to hit store shelves in spring of 1999. Whenever people discuss platformers on the original PlayStation nowadays, they always seem to mention the predictable Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. Ape Escape has been sort of forgotten, and that's a shame too, because it was very innovative for its time. It was the first game on the market to require a DualShock controller, and I recall my dad and I purchasing that controller specifically for this game back in the day. Ape Escape is one of those games I revisit every few years for the memories it's left me, but if you know me, you'll know that nostalgic feelings do not make me ignorant of the problems that may plague the relics of my childhood. Let's see if Ape Escape has stood the test of time, and while I'm at it, I might as well cover the port for the PlayStation Portable released in 2005 as Ape Escape on the Loose in North America and in 2006 as Ape Escape P in Europe. As you boot up the game, a very goofy and quirky yet unique little intro scene plays that sets the tone for the entire game. The attention is focused on this white monkey, Spectre, who puts on the experimental peak point helmet created by the professor. The helmet is supposed to grant monkeys additional intelligence, but due to bugs present in this early build of the helmet, Spectre's mind is turned evil. Spectre then frees all the apes from the amusement park with the intention to turn monkeys into the dominant species. When the young boys Spike and Jake, or Buzz in the European version of the game, come to visit the professor's lab to try out his new time machine, they find the professor and his assistant Natalie, or Katie in the European version, god, these naming differences, tied up in a corner by the rampaging apes. Spectre and his minions proceed to activate the time machine as to rewrite history, causing Spike and Jake to be sent back in time as well. It turns out that Spectre has managed to get a hold of Jake along the way and brainwashed him into his slave, leaving Spike alone in his time-traveling quest to put an end to the impending monkey revolution and rescue his friends. Yep, the plot is silly, but for this type of game, it works just fine, and I believe it deserves a lot of points for likability and originality alone. The actual storytelling, on the other hand, is pretty cringeworthy by today's standards, and even back then it was a little lacking. The animations and facial details do not quite match those of competing Naughty Dog and Insomniac titles. Character interactions come across as awkward, and the voice acting is horrendous. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, eat your heart out.
And how is everything coming along?
Everything is under control and coming along very nicely according to plan.
Very good. Then let's get going.
Right.
The European cast is actually different from the American one though, and I'd say these actors didn't do a job all that bad. Most notably Spectre. He sounds pretty badass and intimidating.
No longer will humans be the dominant species. I'm going to conquer the world. Don't try to stop me. I'm going to relentlessly attack whomever tries to get in my way.
I will say that I find the camera work to be really well done for a PS1 title. It's surprisingly cinematic in that regard. As luck may have it, the PSP version sports slightly enhanced animations and more convincing voice acting in both the American and European releases. It's nothing remarkable, mind you, but if you value cutscene quality in all of your gaming experiences, the PSP version should be more tolerable than the PS1 original. Does the same apply to the actual gameplay though? Ape Escape is a platformer, as I stated before, so you get the basic gist of what you'll be doing here. Jumping over bottomless pits and stage hazards, defeating enemies that stand in your way, collecting stuff as you go, but most importantly, capturing all the loose apes. Playing as Spike, you'll notice he himself isn't exactly the most combat-oriented hero. He's pretty agile, but his means of defending himself is entirely miserable. Taking threats head-on will always result in him taking a few too many punches to the face. It's a good thing then that the professor continues to invent gadgets while Spike is on his animal-abusing adventure. Right off the bat, you are equipped with a stun club that allows you to stun monkeys and kill enemies, as well as the time net for catching and returning said monkeys to the lab. The further you progress, the more gadgets that will be added to your arsenal, making for a total of 7 additional gadgets. The Aquanet, the Monkey Radar, the Slingback Shooter, the Super Hoop, the Sky Flyer, the Remote Control Car, and finally the Magic Punch. The functionality of many of these should speak for themselves, and the majority are pretty fun to use. My favorites would have to be the Super Hoop, which greatly increases your ground speed when used and damages threats upon contact, and the Sky Flyer, a propeller that launches you a few feet into the air. They act as extensions of Spike's natural abilities, meaning they are useful at almost all times, whereas the rest of the equipments are used more situationally, often mandatory to pass or gain access to certain sections of a stage. This can range from something as mundane as hitting switches from afar using the Slingback Shooter to something more fresh, like controlling the RC car as you tag along in order to create the setup to safely cross a bottomless pit. Think of them as mini puzzles or obstructions of sorts, forming one of the elements that separate Ape Escape from other run-of-the-mill 3D platformers. It's unlikely any of this will have you looking up an online guide, but it generally offers enough of a little challenge for it to be worthwhile and shake up the overall gameplay. The variety of concepts never really wear out as the game continues to mix and match elements and throw curveballs. In one stage you have to swiftly pass under a closing door using the Super Hoop after hitting a button. In the other, you have to open a door using the RC car, and eventually you'll have to do these two things in rapid succession in order to progress. There is a sense of development in the level design, and this holds true from an actual platforming perspective as well. In the early stages, the demands are basic and straightforward. Running and jumping around a little bit are the only things you'll have to be concerned about, with most of your time spent hunting down and catching chimps to ease you into the control scheme and flow of the game. Then, as you get further and further, your platforming skills will be put to the test and you'll have to utilize your collection of gadgets more appropriately. Tricky jumps and interfering stage hazards show up more frequently, and the punishment for messing up becomes all the greater. Occasionally, it's a little too great. Darn, that's really obnoxious. Now, of course, the main element that makes Ape Escape unique is the actual process of locating and catching the monkeys. This is where exploration starts playing a major role, as these little devils are all over the place. A couple of them may be in plain sight, but most are hiding in corners or behind environmental objects, or wandering about in a restricted and unreachable area. Fortunately, you acquire the Monkey Radar early on in the game, which is best described as a compass that beeps faster and faster the closer you point the device at a monkey. It also allows you to observe your targets up close in order to get a better idea of their surroundings and where they are located in relation with yourself. Does this dumb down the joy of the hunt? I'd say on the contrary. It's a good thing you're never misguided or left clueless. Ape Escape is a platformer after all, so squandering around for what feels like an eternity in order to advance to the next stage can have a very negative effect on the overall enjoyability. Just look at the emerald hunting stages in Sonic Adventure 2 and how many people loathe them. Even then, knowing the whereabouts of a given chimp doesn't necessarily mean you can catch it. It's still on you to figure out how to reach it. Assuming you can do that, actually capturing monkeys is often another challenge in and of itself. The majority will simply attempt to outrun you, but then there are the bastards who aren't afraid to confront you directly, throw bombs or shoot you down with guns, or even jump into UFOs. Why isn't Ape Escape more popular? What's neat is that there are a plethora of methods you can experiment with to catch the chimps. Do you whip out your inner Solid Snake and play a little stealth game? Will you quickly dash into them in the hope they don't react in time? Or maybe you are going to surprise them by falling down on them from a higher platform. The possibilities seem endless. A single tactic isn't going to cut it either, since each individual monkey has its own stats and personality, reacting to certain approaches differently than others. These nuances don't only set the gameplay itself apart from other platformers that include more static enemies, it's also pretty cute to read some of the monkeys' thoughts or learn more about their habits and experiences. There is actually a full book you can find in the lab that is chock full of trivial tidbits on every single monkey you've caught. And needless to say, it adds a lot of character to a game that's already exploding with it. Sealing the deal for an already great game is the slick method of swapping items. Borrowing from Ocarina of Time, there is a clean menu you can open up at will which allows you to assign the needed gadget to any face button. Because of this efficient system, switching gadgets around is nearly a seamless procedure, especially seeing how you can have 4 gadgets mapped at the same time. It wasn't common for me having to venture into the menu to grab the required item, and I can appreciate it when mechanics in a game hardly ever distract you from the actual experience. In the PSP version though, it's a somewhat different story. Instead of 4 face buttons, you're limited to 3, allowing for 1 less gadget assignment. You might wonder what kind of difference 1 slot makes. Well, perhaps it's just me, but I have the frequently used Stunt Club and Time Net mapped at almost all times. With just 1 remaining face button, I ended up visiting the inventory screen more regularly, more so when the use of a gadget was very situational to begin with. What caused item management to become noticeably less efficient? Remember that Ape Escape on PS1 is built around the use of the 2 analog sticks on the DualShock controller? Any gadget and vehicle that you use in the original game, it's controlled by the right analog stick. For the most part, all of this works very well and feels natural once you get the hang of it. You have full 360 degrees control, so movement is completely fluid. You jump by pressing either the R1 or R2 buttons, which is unconventional but works just fine, so the X button is free to use as mapper for a gadget. Since the PSP doesn't have dual analog sticks and has 2 shoulder buttons less, only the X button remained for jumping. While the frequent item switching is totally passable and shouldn't hamper the actual gameplay, the lack of a second analog stick is definitely the single greatest shortcoming of the PSP version. The RC car, for instance, is now controlled by the D-pad. This presents a problem because the D-pad is less accurate as it is and is located right above the analog stick. I don't know about you, man, but holding the left side of the device with both hands if you want to control Spike and the RC car at the same time is absolute balls. The struggle was real for me near the end of the game. In the PS1 version, it's smooth sailing with 2 analog sticks next to each other. To be fair, most gadgets remain perfectly usable and the game overall is still playable, but the design of Ape Escape clearly isn't fully compatible with the downgraded control scheme in the PSP version, and it should be noted, it's not the outcome of a sloppy port job. The handheld simply lacks the buttons to faithfully recreate the original feel. To its credit also, there is even a benefit to that. No longer are rafts a nightmare to control. In the PS1 version, there's this gimmicky concept where the analog sticks manipulate their respective paddles individually, but it's never seemed to work for me. From the early days as a little sot till now, and I tend to avoid rafts like the plague because of it. In the PSP version, you just hold the analog stick in the desired direction and you're moving. So much easier and so much less frustrating. Sadly, a category where both versions of Ape Escape fall flat on their faces is the boss battles. It's a shame you don't even run into any of them until the final stretch of the game, unless you count the races against Jake. But in hindsight, that may be for the best. A significant portion of the bosses that do exist are other jokes with predictable attacks and patterns that repeat throughout their entire fights. And to make matters worse, they can really overstay their welcome, which is largely cemented in by the fact they are so repetitive in the first place. For reference, it's comparable to the boss in Oil Desert Zone in Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. Considering you've got so many toys to play around with, I'm baffled how boring, bland, and uninspired the boss encounters turn out. Anyway, when you beat Spectre for the first time, he manages to escape and is revealed to be planning evil again. The game then encourages you to capture all the remaining monkeys you've missed if you want to reach the true final face-off with Spectre. As you will probably notice on your first playthrough of Ape Escape, not all monkeys can be caught during your initial visit to a stage, as certain set pieces may be blocked off or inaccessible without the proper gadget. This is already apparent at the very start of the game, where the Sky Flyer is necessary for you to be able to get a hold of this monkey right here. For those willing to take on this quest of snooping up every loose chimp in the game, runtime can potentially be doubled, and I believe this is a great way to increase replay value. It can be somewhat annoying, to be honest. A handful of stages are open playgrounds in the vein of Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine, allowing you to capture the leftover chimps in next to no time at all. Unfortunately, too many stages are progressive with dead ends, and it's usually near or at these ends where the remaining monkeys are tucked away. This equates to traversing through empty levels from time to time and some massive backtracking. And while it's nothing intolerable in my eyes, transportation points for every section within a level would not have hurt, now would it? For the true completionists, however, there is even more to do before you can show off a 100% save file. Firstly, after catching every last monkey in a stage, the time trial mode is unlocked for that specific stage. Similarly to Crash Bandicoot Warped, there are 3 target times. One for a lame bronze medal, one for a cool silver medal, and one for a graceful gold medal. Time trial is cool on paper, and it was brilliant in Crash. In Ape Escape, it's very unremarkable, since the monkey quota you need to fulfill never exceeds 4 or 5, I believe. The later stages tend to have about 20 chimps to catch, so yeah, try to wrap your head around why they missed the mark with the time attack, in my opinion. Secondly, each stage has a certain amount of Spectre coins to collect. You don't get a Spectre coin radar though, so you're blind when searching for these coins. Some of them are actually cleverly placed, but most aren't that hard to find. Amassing all the Spectre coins is a fun side quest for players who want to achieve that 100% save file, but you can also unlock a handful of minigames with them the more you collect, so there's more than just bragging rights. Or not, most of the minigames are boring. They feel gimmicky, tacked on, and get very old very quickly. You ski as flat cardboard characters in one game, and you do some monkey boxing in the other. Maybe they're fun distractions to some, especially since they are 2-player compatible. To me, they're worthless wastes of time. In contrast, the last minigame, Galaxy Monkey, is pretty damn addicting. It's very similar to one of those old Atari 2600 games like Asteroids, where you must survive as long as you can by dodging projectiles and taking down incoming threats with a pea shooter. I can actually dig this little game and would have tried to beat it if I didn't have to move on to scripting and producing this review. For some sad reason, they decided to remove Galaxy Monkey from the PSP version. May I ask why? Oh well, at least all the other minigames have gotten a boost in quality. They're less superficial and more intricate, and I could maybe see myself playing these with a friend in multiplayer to kill some time on the go. Ape Ping Pong is a new addition not seen in the PS1 version, and it's on par with the other minigames when it comes to enjoyability. But I don't feel like talking about these minigames anymore though, so let's move on to what actually matters to the main game, graphics, and sound. Visually, Ape Escape looks very appealing for a PlayStation 1 title. The art style is child-friendly and the monkeys are incredibly charming. I like the variety of themes introduced with the time-traveling plot, and the environments have actual life to them. Animals like crabs and rats walk around, trees blow in the wind, steam rises from hot tubs, and the transparent water splashes and bubbles when you fall in and swim around. There is lighting and shadowing going on here as well, and textures are pretty sharp. Some marvelous technical skills were needed to achieve all that graphical fidelity on the PlayStation hardware, and Ape Escape just has a level of detail that few other competing titles possess. The trade-off seems to be that the render distance is rather limited, as you'll constantly see parts of the setting slowly fading in and out as you move closer or further away. And the game does also have its moments of hardware struggles every so often. Thankfully, the poor view distance isn't too distracting and such severe slowdown isn't that common of an occurrence. As for the PSP ports, mixed feelings. The art style itself is more cartoonish with bolder colors, which I am not very fond of in this particular case, and the stages look flat compared to the PS1 original, as lighting and shadowing seems kind of absent. On the bright side, monkey and character models are smoother and the view distance is much improved. A number of the stages have fog, but that's intentional. No longer do walls inside of a building disappear when you walk away from them, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Your field of view is also wider thanks to the 16:9 aspect ratio, and I can't think of any slowdown issues off the top of my head. I wish the load times were as optimized though. They aren't anywhere nearly as relentless as in Sonic 2006 or Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex on PlayStation 2, but that is not a compliment when I think about it. Jumping over to the music now, and luckily I can be just as positive about that. Composer Soichi Terada, also known for his work on Fantavision, decided to make drum and bass the prominent genre of this soundtrack, with some traditional platforming vibes sprinkled in on the occasion. Ape Escape doesn't feature your typical platforming score, but it fits the various time periods and goofy nature of chasing twisted self-aware monkeys very well. The instrumentation is some of the best you will hear in a PS1 game using MIDI to play back music, and the sheer amount of tunes is not too shabby. Crumbling Castle is one of my all-time favorite video game songs, and it's all in the arrangement, not so much ingenious writing. Those not into drum and bass or bass-driven music likely find Ape Escape's song to be highly repetitive because of the general lack of strong and memorable melodies. But if you're like me and appreciate the genre, you'll find a lot to love. The soundtrack in the PSP version includes the same pieces as the original, and all the songs are largely identical, just with higher quality synths and or slightly altered arrangements. This might be nostalgia mocking with me here, but ignoring the odd exceptions to the rule, I prefer the PS1 renditions all across the board. It's also off-putting how the music restarts when you enter a new section of the current stage. That doesn't happen in the original. Still, the PSP music can be a joy to listen to, and the following samples should support my statement. What may appear to be a silly kids game with monkeys in it on the surface could very well be one of the most innovative 3D platformers you will ever play. Looks sure can be deceiving. Ape Escape strikes such a fine balance between great traditional platforming, solving Zelda-esque mini-puzzles to advance, and the ever so addictive quest of locating and catching violent monkeys, that none of these elements lose their appeal throughout. On top of that, you've got a fun and varied set of gadgets that use the DualShock controller in clever ways, which only adds to the highly unique title that is Ape Escape. The controls do have a bit of a learning curve to them at first, and the boss fights are nothing short of awful, but the positive aspects of Ape Escape far outweigh the negative ones. It is a brilliant game that still holds up today, and I encourage any fan of platformers to check it out. And hell, maybe even if you usually don't care for them. This is easily one of the PlayStation 1's finest exclusives, and that's really the version to play for the intended gameplay experience. Only if presentation values and portability hold more weight to you, I'd recommend you go with the PSP port. The original has sadly never made it into the PS1 Classic selection on PlayStation Network, but the asking price it goes for on eBay is well worth it for both the PAL and NTSC releases. The PSP version does go for cheaper online if money is tight, and you can even download it digitally for compatibility with the PlayStation Vita as well. Just please beware, if you live in Europe and want to purchase the original with the intention to play it on your PlayStation 3, make sure you have a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 console around to use instead. The PAL version is not compatible with the PlayStation 3 due to conflicts in the game's anti-piracy coding. The NTSC version has no such programming in place, so fear not if you live in the United States. Ah man, this review has been long overdue, but I hope the wait was worth it. I also hope you enjoyed the long ass runtime, though I can't guarantee that future videos will always be this vastly thorough. Either way, thank you for your patience, have a great day, and I'd love to see you all next time.